Hello, everybody. Welcome on the Lights on Data show. Today, we're going to talk about how privacy laws affect your analytics strategy.
I have the honor of introducing our guest. He's for the second time here at the Lights on Data show, and we are extremely excited to have him back. Maciej is the CEO of Piwik Pro. He is an ad tech and martech expert, founder of several successful companies, and an online privacy rights advocate. Striving towards more conscious data use and a healthier digital advertising ecosystem, Maciej is currently devoting his knowledge and skills to developing Piwik Pro, a privacy focused analytics platform, the perfect alternative to Google Analytics. Piwik Pro is widely adopted in the healthcare and financial sectors, among government institutions, and by large enterprises, including Fortune 500 companies. With the help of a team of over 100 people, he's shaping Piwik Pro Analytics Suite in a must have for industries handling sensitive data and a platform of choice for every privacy friendly company. Privately, our guest is a general aviation pilot and a cat lover, just like George and myself. He lives in Poland. Welcome, Maciej.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me for the second time. It's great to be back here.
It's great to have you back. And everyone, if you haven't watched our first episode with Maciej, it's the one on December 1st. And this time we will go right into the topic. Maciej, we have different privacy laws all around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between them? And yeah, so what can you say to that topic, please?
Mhm. Sure. So I think the privacy laws is a very hot topic, and
Mm,
there are quite a lot of approaches, and a lot of people talk only about GDPR and what happens in Europe because they are probably the most strict ones. But there is a lot happening also in the North America. So we have PIPEDA in Canada as well as
mm,
CPPA and CCPA in California, and in other states we also have some emerging privacy laws. Maybe at some point there will be even a federal law, but that's probably down the road. And one of the big differences between the approach in North America as in Europe is how these laws work in connection with the online data. So there's a lot of other smaller differences, but I think given the topic and the interest of your audience, that would be the most valid point. So in North America, we typically work on the opt-out laws. So we have to inform or we have to provide a link to opt out of collecting the data or monetizing the data, like in California. In Canada, it's even in collection and processing it. While in Europe, in EU, as well as actually in Brazil, because they more or less copied
mm,
pasted the law,
mm,
this is an opt-in law, which means that before we use data, for example, for marketing or for other purposes, before we build a marketing profile of the visitor, we have to collect a consent from the visitor.
right.
Yeah.
Interesting. As Aswin is mentioning here, GDPR opt out, CCPA opt in, but it sounds like it's the opposite, right?
Yeah,
CCPA is opt out.
it's actually the opposite. So GDPR opt-in and CCPA opt-out.
And what if you had all this data prior to these laws coming into effect? Do you need to notify your customers and ask for their permissions?
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting part because if it's opt-in law, you have to actually acquire this consent from the visitors. You can no longer use this data, and this was a huge thing happening when the law kicked in Europe. That's now the marketers were sending out the emails for the newsletter to all the newsletter database to acquire the consent when they were not certain they had it, because many of the companies were prepared for that ahead of time and were collecting it already for like a year, 2, 3 ahead. But some of them were not and had to just basically clean up the database to make sure they are not violating the regulation.
Very, very interesting. But this just refers to your email, that personal data, or does it go into the cookies that we're seeing that we sometimes need to click? Do you accept yes, no? And it seems like we don't really have a choice. It seems like we have a choice, but if you don't click accept, I don't know. What do you think,
happened?
Maciej? Yeah,
Yeah, what happens? Like the big problem is that in many cases nothing happens, and that's not correct. But yes, so when it comes to the cookies and IP addresses, etc., I think the regulators are more or less aligned that this is personal data, and that's the big change that the new privacy laws around the globe and in Europe, in the US, in Canada, also in other parts of the world, for example, in Indonesia or in Japan, they are starting taking account this new world that we live in. And that's not only cookies, but there are also things like, digital fingerprints or our physical fingerprints or other parts of the identification that 30 or 40 years were like never heard of because we didn't have that technology and the law was not prepared for that. So it's taken into account. The problem with the consent is the online consent is, as you said, many websites implemented incorrectly, and they you have to click 3 times to get to the option to actually say no, and the only accept all is visible. And we already saw rulings that said that this is incorrect, and we already saw some first fines, so that's changing. But that's more of this European thing where brands try to encourage, but sometimes force the user to give the opt-in, because without that they cannot collect certain data. And we think you can think of things like cookies, IP addresses, and anything that can actually lead to identifying an individual. So this could be, for example, a device fingerprint as well. Because in the end, I can, with this fingerprint, I can detect that this is you coming back to the website, and I can build some profile around you.
May I ask who applies the fees?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, who applies the fees? So whom do the companies pay the fees to? Is it the national governments? Is it other authorities?
So I guess you are referring to the fines when they
The fines,
violate
sorry, not the fees. Yes, exactly.
the laws.
My bad.
No worries. So it goes to the I think to the agencies that put this fine, but they actually go to the budget of the countries that fine the companies. So theoretically, this money should be put into some good use, but we know how it is, that the government spending may have some holes, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller.
Right. Aswin was mentioning that there are cookie laws as well that he's aware of. So cookies, pixels, and trackers are all covered under the broader cookie law.
Yeah, so a good example is PEC in the in the UK. And that's actually, there is a GDPR in the UK, even though they exited the European Union, they still have GDPR because they adopted it before they exit and they kept it. But they have also a separate law on cookies. I mean, it's cookies in tracking technologies. So actually, it's like privacy, electronic communication regulation. And what's very important to know is that these laws are not only about cookies. They are also about, for example, fingerprints, because they refer to any mechanism that device that it can identify the device. In Germany, there is a telecommunication law that just came into force in the fall. I think it's DSG. But in general, in the end, we talk about when you can set cookies or when you can use them. And in particular, in the UK, it says that there's almost no exception besides the functional cookies that we need, for example, when we are changing a language version of the website. That kind of cookie that saves us the language version of the website is okay. But the moment you use this cookie for identification of the visitor, it's no longer okay to set it without having the user's permission for that.
So all these cookie laws and privacy laws definitely had a big effect, a big blow, I would say, to the analytical strategies that companies were adopting there. And with all these changes that are coming on, and with more privacy laws coming to different areas of the world, how are these then affecting that analytic strategy that companies need to worry about?
Yeah, so the thing is, as you said, having probably just 10, 20, maybe 30%, if you are lucky, percent of the data is not enough to, for example, analyze the performance of marketing campaigns or customer journey. And that's a huge challenge. And we saw different approaches. It's not so big problem in the US or Canada yet because it's an opt-out law. So if you have 10 to 20% people opting in, you probably will have even less opting out because the convenience wins, no matter whatever is written in the consent window. So what we see is that in Europe, you tend to have more and more countries accepting the fact that analytics is exempted from the consent collection under certain conditions. And examples include here France. France, for example, validates how the vendors are approaching data collection and whether they are doing it only at aggregate level, where they are keeping the data, whether it's only used for the website owner. And they keep the list of the vendors that are allowed to collect 100% of the data without the consent. And Piwik Pro is on this list among some other European vendors. Google Analytics is not there because of the way the data is handled. It's transferred. It's also used in the advertising ecosystem, so it does not fulfill these requirements. In other countries, such as Denmark, there was just some high-level guidelines under which conditions you can use analytics without the consent. And these guidelines included that you use this data only for your own website. You are not tracking the user cross-website. You are not transferring data to other parties or sharing it with third parties. And you are not building a profile of the visitor. And again, our solution have for example, anonymous mode where it simply allows to collect this data compliant with this exemption. And this is the general direction in Europe, even in e-privacy, so the regulation that will come in some time. It's coming for the last 3 years, but maybe finally they will pass it. There is similar wording around analytics. And I think it's a good step for marketers because they can, when they meet the conditions, they can use the tools that are compliant and that they can analyze all the traffic, not only this 10 or 20% that really is the small sample. And it's not even representable sample because it's only people who give the consent, and you have specific group that will always give consent and specific group that will always reject no matter what.
Very interesting. Just want to say a quick hello to Susan Walsh for joining us here, and Kate Strachny and Scott Taylor, the data whisperer, and of course Aswin and Sharon and Bernardo, this is his first live session. So there you go. Welcome, Bernardo. And Petri. And Petri's from Finland. And from what I know, Finland has an extra data protection act as well on top of GDPR. So certain countries are going even more above and beyond to make sure that their citizens' private data is being protected more so.
A good example is also Germany. They have also this TTDSG law that is on top of the GDPR.
Mm-hmm. And I know right before the show, you're mentioning that one of your local data protection authorities decided that Google Analytics is illegal. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that was a surprise. It happened last week, I think around Thursday or Friday, and the Austrian Data Protection Authority basically made a ruling that Google Analytics is illegal. It was related to the complaint that they received from Max Schrems, so a privacy activist. And such complaint was made also in other European countries. So it's still being processed in other countries. But the first ruling came in Austria last week. And it basically says it's legal due to the main reason was that data transfers from Europe to the US, and the reasoning was that the US does not meet the strict data protection requirements that Europe has, and that's an ongoing matter. You probably has heard about invalidating US EU privacy shield, and there was some other follow-ups to that part. And that's like a ruling against Google that is pretty bold. And as a follow-up, I think on this next day, a Dutch data protection authority showed in their guidelines, because they published the guidelines how to use Google Analytics in a privacy compliant matter, but they actually updated the guidelines, and they said that due to this ruling in Austria, Google Analytics soon may be illegal. And that's like literal wording, which is something that also unheard of. Like I wasn't like, it's good for my company, but I wasn't like even expecting that the regulators will be so aggressively pursuing this matter, as they are also like have other cases against Facebook and others where it deals not only with cookies but also with much more sensitive data that we share on social media.
It's huge, and it can have that domino effect, like you're mentioning. The whole industry will be impacted. So then we need services such as Piwik Pro to help us with this. So that's what I wanted to also ask you. We keep talking about this third party data, third party cookies. How can a company take ownership of all of that and not be dependent on Google Analytics and get around all of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we are, of course, one of the options, and I'm always encouraging to sign up and try it. We have a free version that is, you can use it with up to certain traffic limit, which I think is quite generous because it's 500,000 actions per month. But there are also other alternatives, and I think like using Piwik Pro or using any other European alternative is a way to go. And we are like taking back this monopoly that Google created on this market. And I think in general, it's a good thing that we will have more analytics companies, because this will lead to more innovation and more competition. And actually, this will be better for marketers and everyone who works in the online space, because the products will get better. Like you won't have better products if there is just one player that's dominated the market.
Right. We have a couple of questions that come in that I want to take. And the first one is from Petri, and he's wondering, do you see that the different way that China, EU, USA apply GDPR and related privacy rules and rights has impact on innovation and level of advancement, what can be achieved with data tech and science and competence too? So do you think all these privacy laws are impeding innovation?
Mm-hmm. So I don't think that they are impeding it. They are definitely adding some additional effort, but we have to have some sort of balance, because my background is in ad tech. I was in ad tech 15 years ago or even more, and I know how it looked like. Let's collect all the data that we can, store it somewhere because storage is relatively cheap, and then we'll figure it out what to do with that. And I don't think this is a good idea, and I don't think this leads to innovation. I think like innovation and the future is also about sustainability and making sure it's good for the consumer. And protecting the data of consumers is actually good. I want data about me to be processed by the brands that I use and that I trust, not by any random brand that is just having a tracker on the website that I visited.
And Sharon is wondering, do you think there will be global harmonization of privacy laws, regulations eventually?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question. And I think like I would love to, because it will make life simpler for companies and that can actually like decrease this effort. But I don't think that this will happen, unfortunately, because there is too much like conflicts of interests and politics that it's hard to like. Maybe in the end, the largest markets will be able to agree on something. I don't think this will happen with China. Maybe US and Europe are the closest, but given the history of like invalidating what was agreed already, that might be very challenging. But it will be good for the business. Like we use it's like we use so many things that are unified, like even phone numbers, like you don't have to connect to separate network or internet,
Right.
like it's all unified using common protocols. And unfortunately it's not the case with the law. Maybe that's why we have so many lawyers, but it would be lovely to have such harmonization, but I don't believe it personally in that.
So what's the strategy then, meanwhile, for companies? So one, would they choose the most stringent privacy law to respect, and that's the one that they abide to? Because I would assume a company has nowadays customers from all over the world, not just in
Right.
Europe, not just in the US and all these countries. So let's say GDPR is the most stringent. Do they just abide to that and then they're good with all the other laws? Or they try and restrict then customers coming in from a country that it's not under their own privacy law, just to avoid all of that. Or I guess the other option is, let's not worry about all of that. Let's take control of our data, and we can manage it that way without having to deal with all this cookie consent. And
yeah, so we see different approaches because we have a lot of very large clients that operate in many countries. And there is like hosting, for example, data in Europe and having EU compliance solution solves the issue for certain amount of the world countries, but it does not solve it for all. I will give you one example. For example, in Russia, you have to have the data hosted in Russia. And because we are agnostic of the hosting provider, we, for example, have couple corporations that are from UK, US, but they have their Russian operation, and we host it on Yandex Cloud for them for just for this Russian operations. But for the rest of the world, we can host it in Europe or in the US, depending on the company. So you can get away with having it for certain markets, even sometimes very large markets, but there will be still markets like China will be another example where you will have to host it locally. The good thing is that for these operations, I think that's possible because China is, for example, so big market in itself that you can have just the data for this market in that country, and for the rest hosted elsewhere. And that's like, I think the topic goes back to harmonization. Yes, you can solve it with like going with more stringent law, but not necessarily that it could be good for your business because you will have a bit less data. So we take an approach where we also allow to comply with different regulation at the same time. So for example, for the EU countries and UK, have it opt-in, show consent for allowing to collect more data for these visitors. For those that don't give the consent, we have still some aggregated anonymous data. And for the US, we just give an opt-out because we can collect the data. We don't have to ask for the permission. We have to inform and give an option to object this tracking.
There's a great conversation happening here in the comments. Just want to put on Scott Taylor's last comment, who's mentioning that the US has them by state in terms of the privacy law. So we're lucky to have less than 50 here.
Yeah. That's true. Like I think we analyzed at least already 5 that have some new laws. Not every state have it yet, but we'll see. That's why I brought up that maybe at some point the states will agree to like work towards the federal law,
Right.
because that would probably be much easier, especially that most of the companies in the US treat US as a single large market, which makes sense.
It would be, I think, interesting to see if having more data translates in having better revenues in a country. I think that's an interesting study to make. I'm very curious. I don't know if this is a stupid question or not, but are there any rules that are contradictory and that they're
Um,
hard to align?
I don't think there are that are contradictory. It's that you will have, if you have customers, let's say in 2 different jurisdictions, you have to apply for a different law for different group of the users. Or like do something like I said before, so hosting the data for Europeans in Europe,
Right.
for Russians in Russia, etc. So it complicates things a lot, but it's not contradictory because the law from one region does not apply in other region, like they have local laws. So.
Wow. So all of this can be very challenging for a company, and more so. How can Piwik Pro help with some of its compliance features?
So we try to make the best choice by default, first of all. And the second, we have a lot of flexibility in setting these rules. So we allow different privacy compliance options as well as data collection methods. So whether you want to do it cookieless, whether you want to apply certain like guidelines like from certain regulations, or whether you want to do opt-in only data, you can still do it with us. So there is a lot of configurations that are available, but we also make sure that the default ones will not get you in trouble. So they will have a best balance of collecting as much valuable data while complying, for example, with all these exemption options. So if you place it, for example, on your website and you have the users from the US and the EU, for US ones will do it according to the US law, for the EU ones will do it according to the EU law, taking into account that we can mix this data that is aggregated without building the profiles and use the exemptions from different countries, while if the user gives us the consent, we'll actually collect a bit more data about them, because then this is useful for you in the end. Like if you have this trust of your of your visitor, then and they allow you to tracking, you can then of course do a bit more with the data that you have.
Do you mind showing us?
Sure. I would be happy to. So let me just share the screen, and I can show you. I will be very quick because the platform is large, and I hope you can like.
There'll be a
If
lot to
anyone is
cover.
interested, they can just sign up and explore. But just to give you a bit, just confirm that my screen is visible.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect. So this is analytics, so I won't be going through that, but just to show you, we have some dashboarding functionality, as well as similarly to other leading vendors, a set of reports, building custom reports. What is particularly interesting in the analytics is you also have integrated consent reports, so you can see the decisions of the consent by category, for example. So how many, here not by category, but how many times our consent form was displayed, how many times we got consent, no decision, because you may simply ignore it, or no consent. So actually this in this data set, it's pretty good because the full consent is almost for 1/3 of the users. We can break it down, for example, by consent types to different categories. So let's say I want to consent to analytics or tracking conversions. So it's a bit different, but but still, like most people click agree to all, they don't select the categories. And then you can also see some form interactions, like how many people clicked reject all, save choices, close the consent window, etc. And we have, so that's on the consent statistics. You can also customize this report and combine them with some other metrics that are available here. So I won't be maybe showing that. But you also have all sorts of standard reports that give you this insight. And this data combines the data that is aggregated from the anonymous user as well as from the actual users that give the consent. What's maybe more interesting is you ask like how you set it up, like what are the possibilities of the setup. So I will have a couple examples for here. So if you go to administration and settings, you have for each website the privacy settings. And in this case, I have our integrated consent manager turned on. And we say like what we do when visitors does not consent. So we can still collect this anonymous data, for example, without cookies. Or don't collect data. We can also set the things that we only ask for consent in countries that are under GDPR. So in this case, in the US, it will not show up because we don't have to do it. We also have some specific guidelines, for example, by French CNIL that limits certain functionality which is not allowed by under this guidelines. So that's more high level. We can of course also disable the consent and then have some additional settings. What we use cookies or we use session ID and things like that. So let's say we want this hybrid mode where we have the consent and collect data when we don't have it. So we have also in the consent manager mode. So maybe I'll just refresh it here. So we have the configuration of the consent form. So all is integrated in one platform. So you can see whether it's a pop-up or whether it's a bottom bar like here. And you can just configure it in this specific editor. What you see is like we make this configuration compliant. So one of the things that you have to do is that it's as easy to agree as easy to reject. Like if I make it a link, not a button, then this wouldn't be compliant. But you can do it. Like you can customize it. You will like bear the risk of your decisions, I guess, for that. But you can customize that, change the text, the categories. We also support it in multi-languages, so we can add languages. Like I have couples, but I can add additional languages here. And this consent will show up in the language that I use in my browser.
Nice.
And I will show you an example of that, maybe on our own website. So I opened it here. So here we see the consent bar. We use the bottom bar version. I can see detailed categories if I want to select, or I can just agree or reject all, or I may ignore it. And then we show a small reminder that you back, and maybe PiwikPRO is a nice brand, so I'll agree to everything. But we give this choice, and we also give some special widgets for the privacy policy page, so you can easily change this setting, and I can check, and I can, let's say, change it from here. As well as we give also another widget that allows us to send a data subject request. So this is more related to the GDPR, where I want access or I want my data deleted, and I can send them to the data administrator. And that's maybe we talked a lot about the opt-in, but we also have the opt-out options that you can install, especially if you are US. You will more likely use this option in the administrations, in the settings, and under privacy. Under opt-out form, you can design your opt-out form, and you can preview it. This will look like that, and you just opt out of data collection or data monetization, however you want to phrase it, and you have just a snippet that you paste on your privacy page, and that's it to get compliant for that regulation. We also have some other settings related to privacy that are related to masking IP addresses. But again, we try to make sure that as much as possible is good to go with default settings. And we have a great materials in our help center where you can read more about different options for tracking the tracking the different modes of tracking that we have. So if you go into our help center, we try to we have the whole section called privacy, and we'll have here guides for different regulations, and as well as a general article that I really recommend if somebody is interested into all the types of different ways you can track. And we explain like what kind of metrics will be available, what kind of data will not be available under certain modes that you select in our software. So we try to also explain things in very detail to our users or to our customers.
Very nice. It's very straightforward and simple. You just really make it simple for all of us. As Susan was mentioning, it looks good. Ravid is saying that Piwik is doing some important stuff, and I definitely agree. And having installed this myself, the free version, which by the way you can download here, piwik.pro/core-plan. So you can go there and download it yourself. Well, subscribe for it yourself, sign up for it for free, and get to use it. And what I also enjoy about is that you're sending, I guess there are some automated emails that really, with each email, it's teaching you a little bit more and showing you the insights and outs and gives you tips and tricks. And really like that onboarding experience that you're offering. You're, again, making it very simple for people to use.
Yeah, thanks for feedback. And of course, you can opt out from this email if you don't want to receive them. So we are compliant with all our marketing collateral as well.
Of course. Ravid had a quick question here. Which is the most difficult part to maintain for right analytical strategies while privacy laws are in place?
I think it's monitoring everything that changes in the different laws. I mean, it's not only the laws. The laws wouldn't be the problem because they don't change so quickly and you know that something is coming up. The problem is that there are then rulings that interpret the law in certain way or make it more precise. And that comes sometimes as a surprise. So there is no way to be actually on top of every single jurisdiction and every single law. We try as best as we can, but sometimes it turns out that we have to push something quickly on our roadmap to make sure that we are prepared ahead of time, and there is not very much time. It's nice that some regulators give some period of time. I think in France it was like when there were some changes or they made some ruling. They said there is a grace period for 6 months. You can prepare, but then we'll actually prosecute you. So it is a message more to publishers that were actually not giving the people the right way to consent or not. Like it was only yes and then or 10 clicks to say no. But if there is this grace period, that's great. But sometimes there isn't, and that's sometimes a challenge to keep up with, especially if you are doing business around the globe. You are not focused only, for example, on Europe or only on the US.
Oh, I can imagine. And even with 6 months, it doesn't seem like it's enough time sometimes, especially for some big companies. I mean, I remember when GDPR got rolled out and they had like 2 years of a head start. A lot of companies were not compliant even after these 2 years.
But you have to ask like whether they actually started preparing for 2 years or when the or the day after.
Good point.
Maciej, which role in the company usually mans Piwik Pro?
So
Or
usually we have marketing teams using our products. So whether these are marketing managers or performance marketers or content writers, for example, because they want to see how their content is performing.
Mm.
But we also see a lot of usage, for example, among financial institutions as well as healthcare and other industries from product managers who track not the website but their digital product, an application or a web application, and they want to know and get some insights. And that's actually a nice tool to get some quantitative data on the usage of the product and what's being adopted, what's not, where there are some issues with the product. So that's I think that's our second most popular type of people that use Piwik Pro.
wonderful. I think that's a statement to the fact that it's actually very easy to use if non-IT people
Yeah,
actually
we
do
actually
that,
don't
right?
have too many. Like there are some technical people that use it because they use the tag manager and implement things for like marketing teams or others. But we try to make it as easy to use for from the reporting side for marketers and other non-technical people.
Nice.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
So just a reminder again for people to that you can go check it out here, sign up for free, and see what you can do with it. Be compliant.
From it, you can do a lot, and it's a free version. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely try it out.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank our audience for all these insightful questions that you had so far. And yeah,
Maciej, thank you so
Yeah.
much for
Thank you
everything.
very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and it's always nice to talk to you.
well, likewise, likewise. And you're making this fun and easy. And again, I have to reiterate this. I like how Piwik Pro is in a way takes the stress out of trying to be
Mm,
compliant with these privacy laws. I feel like
absolutely.
weight is off your shoulders, and I know I didn't have a few things in place before using Piwik Pro, so now that it was so easy for me to walk through it and be sure that okay, my site is compliant. Good,
Phew.
Cool. Very nice to hear, and I will always welcome feedback how we can do it even better. So
sounds good. All right,
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for your support and for your lovely questions. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.
bye
bye
everyone.
bye.